Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education, inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
Oh, very excited for what you've put together today. One of the best panels we've had.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And without any further ado, let's jump in and introduce our amazing guest today. We just have absolute educational rock stars from across the country with us, and I just can't wait to get this conversation underway. So we have from Maine Township District 207 in Illinois, Jill Giarcaris, who's the Director of Adult Learning and the Director of the Chicago Coaching Center. She sits on the Board of Directors at ICIC. And then we have Sari Goldberg, former classroom teacher, literacy specialist, supervisor, and coordinator, currently a central administrator on Long Island, also a very active member in Ed Camp Long Island on their planning team. And then we have in Tampa Bay, Florida, Michelle Moore, an educator who emphasizes STEM and computer science and supports districts with technological implementation with the purpose of increasing meaningful engaging learning experiences. And she's also a 2019 ASCD Emerging Leader. And we have Nicole Allen, a building administrator from Long Island, former social studies chairperson, executive board member of the School Administrator Association of New York State, a Hofstra University adjunct professor and attendee of the Harvard Principal Center. And finally, we have Allison Apsey, principal at Quincy Elementary in Zeeland, Michigan, TEDx speaker, national conference presenter, author of 4 books, most notably The Path to Serendipity, and her blog, The Serendipity Journal. Welcome all to State of Ed podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excited to be here.
Nick, I don't know about you, but I've never felt less qualified in my life to moderate a conversation.
Well, again, remember, you're an administrator right now. You know, when I tell my students, though, all the time, there are great educators all over this country. And whenever I meet them, it just inspires me to want to be better. I think that's probably what's going to happen at the end of this conversation.
Absolutely. And a number of individuals here I have had the good fortune of meeting through Twitter, through PLN, and just watching and admiring the contributions that they're making online to the internet educational community. It's inspiring, like you said, and just so excited to have everyone here today with us. So let's jump right in, because this school year is unlike any other. And certainly COVID-19, the first disruption, has changed everything seismically. So as educators, what has been the greatest challenge that you've experienced so far since the middle of March till today?
Nothing like starting with an easy question, Marc.
Well, Nick told me to put the tea away, so...
I'll speak from my perspective within my district. The inspiring educators have been just blowing us away. You know, you talk about some of the challenges. Right out of the gate, we did not have a digital platform. We had to roll out Google Classroom for 6,000 students, 700 educators, and we did it in 2 weeks. And it is absolutely phenomenal to see the way that they have embraced it, the way that they're utilizing it, and the way that they're asking for more. We've been using Screencastify, we've been using Nearpod. I mean, the amount of resources that they have then jumped into next, nothing can stop them. It's been incredible.
That's really exciting to hear.
I'm going to piggyback off her. It's been really phenomenal for me. So in my position, I get to support districts with their implementation of technology. And it's great because I have these really large districts that are in completely different places with technology. So, you know, to her point, I had some that kind of knew they may have had a couple of tools in their resource box, but never really attended a training, to others that had, 3 years of LMS implementation and really heavy training. And I was so blown away by teachers' motivation and ability to pivot overnight. I had one that texted me. She's like the best teacher in the world, second grade teacher, never going to retire. She texted me, "You would be so proud of me. I didn't even know what Zoom was, and I just did a breakout room with my students." And I feel like there was a lot of that and a lot of a heavy lift was put on the teachers. The expectation was you're going to engage these students regardless of whether it's virtual or in class, and you're going to teach your standards regardless of whether there's a state assessment attached to it. And they stepped up to the plate in many, many aspects, and a lot from literally not knowing they had access to Office 365 or not knowing what Google Classroom was to, boot camp training, and all of a sudden doing it with their kids.
I think I agree with everything you both said, and I think the biggest challenge really for me personally, maybe in my role, was how do you get that just in time professional development out to teachers who, like Michelle so eloquently described, we had teachers from A to Z. We had teachers who have been using some of these instructional technology tools for years, and they're experts in it, and people who were just literally being thrown into the deep end and had to swim. And so how do you differentiate that PD? How do you just make sure that you have all the support that's possibly available? And how do you do that all virtually and not in person? So I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges I personally faced. But I think I also want to speak for teachers. I think in general, teachers faced a huge challenge of teaching from their homes and balancing their lives at home. We had teachers, again, really challenging for two reasons. Some teachers who had young children of their own at home and trying to teach their students and their children all at once, and just the social emotional burden that placed on them. And then I had teachers who they were showing up for every single PD thing I offered, and I finally realized some of them lived alone, and that was the only opportunity they had outside of their students to really interact with anyone. And so I think it was really hard for some of our staff members who were also lonely during all of that. So there was just so many layers there for so many weeks where we had to, as I think school leaders, not just think about the nuts and bolts in getting the tools into our teachers' hands and making sure the learning could go on, but also really caring for our staff the best that we could and being empathetic to what they were going through as well as what our students were going through.
Well, I think that I have some of the similar thoughts that everyone else had, but in addition to that, our district already had our one-to-one initiative, and we've been doing it for a pretty long time. So as far as developing teachers to use the technology, it wasn't like a huge jump for us with the remote learning. With that said, the challenge that we saw in our district, and particularly in my school, was keeping kids engaged through the remote learning, right? And also supporting parents with the remote learning, because our teachers have been professionally developed and they've been using technology for a while. However, now our parents were put in the position where now they're having to help their kids. So we did a lot of parent training, to be honest with you, to help support parents, support learning at home. With that said, in our school, and particularly our school, we have many ENL students. So the challenge was, okay, how do you deliver that instruction for ENL students when you're not face-to-face with them in the classroom? So we had to talk about, what learning looked like for those students and what teaching remotely looked like for those students and what tools we could use to help them with the remote learning. So there were a few challenges there, but I think we got through it. Thank God.
You're still standing. That's important.
Yes.
I'm listening to what Allison and what Nicole just shared, and there was a really large piece of this for us. With the students, we created two guiding principles going into this, and the first one was staying connected, and that was keeping the staff connected to each other, keeping us connected to the students, and the second one was to obviously keep learning alive. But that connection piece was so important. And what does that look like? And how do we do that? You don't know what's going on the other side of that screen. They might not be joining the Zoom because, unfortunately somebody, was ill at home. We didn't know if it was just maybe a conflict with there's only one device and the other child had a Zoom as well. So there was a lot of digging that we really needed to do and really reach out. There was a lot of phone calls, a lot of communication. Those relationships really were definitely set as a very high priority above all others.
Nicole, yes, when you talk about like getting students engaged, I think that's what so many people have focused on. But the initial, rollout of just getting kids with internet connection and devices, did any of you, I know Nicole said, in her district, everybody already had a device. Did any of your districts have an issue with kids who didn't have either a tablet or internet access?
We were lucky as well. We've been 1-to-1 for years. We were one of the first Google partners school districts, but what we didn't know was what kind of access to Wi-Fi they had at home. Like we know they all had devices in their hands. Now I know that wasn't true for all of our districts, and I'm interested in hearing what the situation was for all of you. But as soon as we kind of saw this coming down the coming down the pipe, we were like, okay, we need to find the first thing we need to do is find out who doesn't have access. And so we put out a survey. We identified those people. We got those families hotspots. So that's one thing I am really proud of our district is that we kind of knew everything rested on that. And so we need to make sure now, like it was like March, 7th or 8th when we were starting to see here in Chicago, like, we might be in trouble here. And by March 13th, we were shut down. So in those just 5 days, we figured out, who didn't have access and got them hotspots in their homes. And that's something I'm super proud of. But I am interested, I know that's not the case for districts across the country. And there were plenty of school districts, even right near here by me, that were scrambling and having their entire administrative team on site, issuing devices at moment's notice to kids.
Yeah, I'll jump in. A couple of different things happened in Florida, but the districts down here are huge. It's insane. So where I live in Tampa, we have over 220,000 students. I think most of the districts did a phenomenal job of sending out that survey, like Judy mentioned, right away, figuring out who has access to devices at home, who has internet, and what does that look like? Because even, in my case as a parent, yes, we have devices at home, but now everybody needs a device at the same time to do their work, their school. I have 2 boys. So if you would have asked me in that survey, do you need a device? I'm like, no, we have like devices all over here. But, oh, wait, we need actual like laptops for everyone to work on all day long. Oh, that's a different story because we have, I have my work laptop. I have my personal MacBook, which I don't know if I want to give to my kids who are 7 and 9. And then we have, iPads and a tablet, but
it doesn't have a touch screen. They don't want it, Michelle.
Right, I know. Well, God bless my 7-year-old because surprisingly, he took on the MacBook and liked it. God bless his soul. But so we were a little bit behind in getting those kids hotspots who needed it. But I will say I was very impressed with our community partnerships and our local cable internet service providers and offering those people who didn't have access a way to get connected. And I will say for being such a massive city, and I know Fort Lauderdale had the same agreement with their local service provider as well as Miami, for the internet provider to see that this was a need and see that they were in a position to help and step up to the plate right away was huge. And when we talk about the impact of COVID on education, I feel like so much of my work was connecting community organizations to schools that I just hope that that partnership continues where community businesses are really empowered and feel like it is their job to support public education as well.
So let's focus on remote learning for a minute. So when we jumped into remote learning, there were different people along different stages of the curve. And now that we're a few months in, I think I forget who, I think maybe it was Nicole, said we survived it. So that was the first phase. Typically, the first phase of anything is just the survival phase. But Allison also mentioned that there's a very real possibility that we're going to be looking at some form of remote learning, at least to some capacity or to some degree, come the fall. So what, as educators who have now experienced this and survived, thankfully, what have you learned about remote learning, the good, the bad, and the ugly? And how do we do remote learning 2.0 come the fall?
The one thing that I've learned the most about remote learning and what it has taught me in the past 3 months is that there are glaring inequities in how we deliver instruction. who has access and who does not, and what it looks like. So, for instance, I have families in my school whose parents are attorneys and who work from home and have plenty of time to support their students in that learning. They're on top of everything. But then I have parents in my school who were still essential workers and working a couple of jobs, and they weren't home with their kids as their kids are supposedly doing their remote learning assignments. So, it comes to the question of how do you support those students, both the ones who don't have the home support, and also you have to support students whose parents are watching your Google Meets, so to speak, for teachers. We had that issue where parents were sitting next to their students and watching the Google Meet too and asking questions, which I thought was funny, but not for that teacher probably. So
How did they do on the tests?
very well, actually.
Oh, good.
I'm looking to see how they do on the AP exam as well. That's a whole nother podcast.
That's right.
That's a whole nother podcast. But it did show, like, for instance, New York City is a half hour from us. And, they're still giving out devices to their kids now. It just shows you that, number one, there are glaring inequities in what we offer our kids in education, although we want them all to attain the same type of goal. But we have to do better providing the same for kids.
Well, in our state, the governor keeps making a point of that. We're from New York, and on every one of his press conferences for like maybe the last week, he keeps quoting the amount of money that some districts spend at the top. $36,000 per student at the top, $13,000 per student at the bottom. So he's clearly trying to hammer that into everybody that we need to alter that, as you bring up, Nicole.
Yeah, Nicole, I'm so glad you started with that equity lesson, because it's not really something we learn from e-learning or remote learning, but it's something that maybe is at least shining a light on it, right? Like, we all knew these inequities existed, but it just brought them to the surface and made them so much more visible, and hopefully will cause us to take, quicker and faster steps to try to address some of that as we go forward. I think there was so much learned. I'm having a hard time deciding which one to actually talk about. Like, you could go in so many different directions and talk about what was learned. To talk, maybe mention something a little bit different is I think we started to learn that the same principles that exist in strong instruction in person actually exist in e-learning and remote learning too. When you actually look at it, the same foundational things of how to engage kids, how to build relationships and build classroom culture, how to assess, the best practices in those areas still hold true. It's just trying to figure out the tool and the way to do it. And so I think by the end of the spring, a lot of teachers were getting some tools in their toolbox. And so some of the professional development we're engaged in our district over the summer are things like, how do I set up my classroom culture in the fall and build relationships with students if I have to do it remotely? How do I assess and design and develop and implement meaningful assessments if I have to do it remotely? How do I actually engage kids in synchronous meetings? Because we're a high school only district, and our teenagers like to turn off their camera, and you're talking to a whole black screen of just icons. And so what are the little tricks? What are the tricks of the trade and the little tips that teachers picked up along the course of the spring that actually worked? So what we're doing is we're just creating a ton of space this summer in our professional development for people to share ideas with one another about those things. But when you really look at the foundational principles, they're the same foundational principles that apply to strong in-person instruction. It's just figuring out the new tools, the new tricks of the trade to make it actually be effective and actually implement those things.
Jill, I just have to add, you say the good principals in person were the ones who were instructional leaders. It's the same thing with teachers. The teachers who were the most engaging in person, well, she was great in class and she's going to be great at home as well. I don't think that there's much of a difference there. And sometimes a lot of people got so upset about kids not being connected or not showing up. Well, now you just know they're not showing up. But when they're in your classroom, they're there physically, but
Right.
I hate to disappoint you, you probably aren't reaching them in person either. They just can hide it better. And I think that has to be a wake up call for a lot of us, that if we don't really completely shift our, again, I speak more on the high school level, but if we don't shift our practices to get to engaging kids and making things student centered all the time, we're wasting time. We're wasting opportunities.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. It was, and it's bad because I think some of what I started seeing on social media was like, well, if your lessons were engaging, your kids would show up. And it's like, well, let's hold on, because they have like a whole world that's been turned upside down. But what I did see were teachers flexing and saying, okay, you know what? I need to check in with my kids emotionally before I can just pretend like I'm going to teach a virtual lesson as if their whole world hadn't been turned upside down. So I did see a lot of teachers using that time virtually to meet, not necessarily to present content or review content, but to do fun community building things like Judy was mentioning. So, how are we going to team build? Or oh my gosh, my son's teacher, God bless her. I'm just like, God bless everyone. Like everyone that got through this, it's insane. But they did a virtual scavenger hunt. And I was like, are you like, what? You're going to do a virtual scavenger? What does that look like? Are you going to come into my office? But it was great. The kids had a blast. And another day they played categories. I mean, and it was a great way for them to see their classmate. He's a 9-year-old, so, not high school, 3rd grade, but still see their classroom classmates and connect. And it had nothing to do with learning or standards, but that's what they needed in that moment, because otherwise I don't think they would have shown up. I don't think kids are going to show up when they have their whole situation turned upside down. And then we did have kids that weren't showing up. I had a principal basically had to go to this family's house because the 2 kids weren't showing up to any of the virtual meetings and they were worried. Well, what happened was it was a Spanish-speaking home, and 3 of the adult family members who lived there were essential workers, and they didn't want the kids to be at risk. So the 2 children were basically like closed off in a bedroom the whole day, trying to do e-school on their own, not speaking English. So they got him the resources, they got him set up, but the teachers, if she hadn't investigated, she might have just been like, oh, well, they're not showing up. Well, little do they know they have this whole other world that they're dealing with where they can't even hug their parents because they don't want to be at risk of getting coronavirus. So, it's just insane. And yeah, I mean, I think it's great if we can get kids to connect, but also if they're not connecting or if they don't want to turn their screens on, like that's okay too. We just kind of poke around, get to the why.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Michelle. I had an opportunity to witness a little bit of what you were talking about. Our AP Bio teacher, who's an absolutely wonderful teacher, invited me to sit in. After the AP exam, they were all working on a project on COVID-19 using their AP Bio skills to actually create almost like a PSA for the community on what the virus is scientifically and biologically. And they just wanted some of my thoughts in terms of how to turn it into something creative. And she started her class with 5 minutes of going one student at a time. Hey, Michelle, how are you today? Everything okay? Follow up about something maybe from a couple of days ago. Everything worked out with her? Great to see you, kid. Hey, Jill, how you doing? And she went one by one by one by one. And I heard in the students' voices and saw on their faces how much that meant to them. In a classroom, she wouldn't spend 5 minutes doing that because it's a whole different atmosphere and a whole different environment. But online, that's how good she is. She just felt the pulse of what her kids needed, and they needed that opportunity to engage and interact with their teacher who they love, but in a virtual setting. So I hear what you're saying, Michelle, very much, and I had a good fortune of witnessing it.
There was a superintendent on Long Island who sent out, I guess, a message to her staff, and she said, in 20 years from now, your students are not going to remember what you taught them, but they'll remember who you were during this crisis. And I thought that was perfectly stated. I mean, these kids needed support. They needed, somebody to just say that they cared about them right now. And again, the content is going to come and go, but who you were during this crisis is what they'll always remember.
It's so true. I mean, you think about, so many of us believe in the power of relationships, and I think that in the last few months that was really truly affirmed. The saying about, you have to Maslow before you can bloom,
Mm.
and there are all of those hidden stories, and you have to, see, look beyond and really see what is going on, because the action doesn't always represent what is truly happening behind closed doors. The first week of our Google Classroom experience, we were having a lot of conversations about what this was going to look like and how many, activities and lessons. And basically we said, cut it in half. And when you're done, cut it in half again. Because what we need to do is really focus on where the students are, how they are feeling, and how we could really best support them right now.
I think one of the transitions that's going to happen as we move into fall is that idea of we were doing like emergency remote learning, and we learned so much about what works and what doesn't work, and the components that are powerful and effective in the classroom that translate into powerful effective practices remotely. Now we're going to move into this like planned distance learning, and taking everything that we learned and pull together, and having the ability to create over the course of the summer a comprehensive plan, with the catalyst of we don't know what it's going to look like in the fall, but we certainly do know that we need to be able to change on a dime from in person. If we are blessed and able to do in person learning in the fall, that on a dime we're going to have to change and transition into remote learning potentially. So just putting into like very thought out, planned practices and procedures and protocols and sharing. I love that idea of spending the summer sharing expertise and all the tricks and tools that we've learned over the course of the 9 weeks or whatever 10 weeks of COVID. So I think that concept of we were doing what we could in a pinch, in an emergency, and now we can take everything we learned and plan.
Just to piggyback off of what you said, Allison, I know, Jill, you had put together for your district a very comprehensive list of tools, digital tools. And what have what have been the responses from the teachers in your district? Which ones do they seem to have gravitated toward, and to what end, or what have been the results of the utilization of those tools?
It's really interesting that I'm glad you asked that question, because it's something I learned. In my role. So I think probably a lot of you had this experience where we went into this, sudden remote learning, all these ed tech companies started throwing stuff at us. It's like, you can use this tool, you can use this tool, and this one's free for forever now for teachers, or this one's free for 6 months for teachers. And I felt like I had to be sort of a gatekeeper to try to like figure out which ones to actually put into teachers' hands and which ones. And then teachers started emailing me, you should really share this with your staff. You should really share this with the staff. This tool I love. Everybody should know about it. It was like, just because you love it, it doesn't mean everybody will love it. So trying to figure out like how to differentiate that for staff was really challenging. And we did put out a survey. And what I learned from staff feedback was, please don't throw too much at us. So although we have a really, really comprehensive website, and it's great for those staff members who like a whole lot of tools, and they want to dig through them, and they want a lot of stuff. But what I found is like in the actual professional development that we offer is figure out what those like, Fab 5 are, or Sensational 6 are, and kind of really get our staff members, like everybody really, really competent in those 5 or 6 tools that if you know these 5 or 6 tools well, you can engage kids. You can deliver content if you want to. You can assess if you want to. So things like Screencastify and Edpuzzle and Whiteboard and Peer Deck, things like that. Like if Cami, if all of our staff can be really knowledgeable in using those 5 or 6 things, then all staff know it so they can collaborate better. And B, all of our students are seeing the same tools from staff member to staff member, so things become more familiar for them. So what we're really doing this summer is we've developed a lot of asynchronous professional development on those 5 or 6 tools that staff members can kind of go through on their own. And then we're following up that asynchronous PD with in-person sort of like discussion and Q&A sessions. It's like, okay, I took the asynchronous. Now I want to talk to other people who took the asynchronous. and pick their brains or ask each other questions in hopes that when we do start back in August, that everybody has those five or six really strong tools in their toolbox, and they're more common across our district then. And by the way, all of those tools were tools that teachers were using before remote learning. And so if for some reason we are blessed to be in person, more power to them. They're going to have more tools in their toolbox that they will still be using then that they maybe weren't using before.
As all you administrators, and Mark, you could answer as well, the teachers who were not using technology on the traditional school setting, do you find that many of them or some of them are going to be more receptive to it once we go back to a in-person environment?
I definitely think so. I think, in all honesty, they had no choice. I think
Mhm.
they were, it was like they were forced into a situation where the technology could not be ignored anymore. And then what I have found in my building in particular is that they said, oh my gosh, why haven't I been using this more? Because they realized the technology has actually enhanced what they've been doing in the classroom for so many years. So I think if there's one thing that COVID has done for us as far as technology is concerned, it's kind of brought a few people out of the dark ages. And they've learned some new tricks and they're willing to bring those things back into the classroom. And they're actually asking for more over the summer, because the question we are getting now as we're winding down, or some of us are winding down, Nick, is are we going to be offered comprehensive PD on technology and how we can use it if we are in fact not back in September? But my answer to that is no. We're going to do PD even if we are back in September. We're not gonna let this fire diminish. We're gonna keep this going and use what's happened over the past 3 months to our advantage, so to speak. So I think that a lot of I hate to put it this way, old dogs have learned some new tricks, and they found that the kids are more responsive when they've been using the technology, and they've had a better time with the remote learning as a result.
I could not agree more, Nicole. I'm hanging on every word that you're saying, thinking about how I have really took a giant step back during this time and seen how much change has happened in such a short amount of time, and how I have seen educators who identify themselves as, tech disabled, who are now running these Zoom sessions and creating these screencastifys, and it's just been, absolutely phenomenal. And I was really starting to think, why now? Why is it that we are able to move at a lightning speed of change, when change is something in an education system and building that you analyze, and how do we support, and how do we motivate, and how do we push? And I've landed in a very personal spot where I just feel we didn't have a choice. It was what was best for students. There was no going back. We could not go back to the brick and mortar. We had to move forward. And when you focus on the kids, the answer's right in front of you.
Nicole, you brought up the AP exams. Just a funny story. After, because I teach it. No, it won't be the controversial part. Don't worry.
A lot of kids had very funny stories this spring.
No. But I teach 2 AP classes, and I get this random email out of the blue from some student who I don't know. He says, "I know you might find this strange, but I self-studied for the AP comparative exam, and I watched all of your videos on your YouTube channel, and I just wanted to thank you. And I'm just curious, could you look over my answer and tell me if you think it's good?" and again, it just shows the power of technology that some random, I'm in New York, and a kid, I think he was from Massachusetts. By the way, his answer was incredible. Do I get credit for his 5? Because it was, but as teachers, I think we all, collaboration is so important. And I think technology is just, we use that word ubiquitously, but we could all be so connected and help all kids in a way. You keep bringing up Screencastify. I've been begging teachers for years to start flipping the classroom and making videos. It just creates such a more dynamic environment in your classroom when you're able to do those things. So I want to be optimistic like Sari and say, I think teachers are going to really start to come to understand that their job and what they do for kids can be so much more intellectually invigorating by doing the things that we had to do, like you said, out of force.
Allison, let me ask you a question since you're an elementary school principal. Are you finding that it's a little bit more challenging bringing remote learning to the elementary age student, as opposed to, for example, some of the rest of us who are working with older kids who can perhaps gravitate towards these things a little bit more easily or don't require the same level of supervision at home?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as being independent learners. And in elementary, I mean, we think about our young five students, our kindergarten students, they are not independent learners. They can't log into Google Classroom and go step one, step two, step three, and work their way through learning opportunities. So, that decision we made to really focus on just strengthening skills and previous learning during our COVID-19 break or remote learning time that we just had, that was really based on the fact that they're not independent learners. We hadn't trained them how to do distance learning or remote learning, and I think that's one of the opportunities that we have this fall. Even hopefully we're in person, we know we have to support our students so that they can be independent if we have to transition to remote learning. And so that's going to require Google Classroom and some of the technology tools that we've been using over the course of these, past 9 weeks or so. We're going to have to embed them into the classroom in the fall, and that's a beautiful opportunity, like you guys have been talking about, to create more robust and engaging learning experiences for our students, whether we're in person or we're remote.
I'm curious to how you all handled in your respective districts the question of grades and grading. I know that was a hotbed, controversial topic in my neck of the woods, and I think it again, and I forget who had said it a little bit earlier, how the pandemic reveals so much about all the underlying problems that perhaps we have put in the corner or purposely don't shine a light on, and now everything was exposed to full daylight. And one of the problems that I feel we encountered was that some of our teachers were over reliant upon the importance of grades in their instructional practices. And when faced with the premise of taking testing away from them or taking the red pen, so to speak, away from them, they felt very disoriented for a while, and some probably still. I just wanted to get a sense of how, in different parts of the country, how that was tackled.
And Mark has heard me scream about this from the very beginning, just so you know.
I was comfortable leaving that part out, Nick, but since you brought it up.
I have very strong opinions, but I'm curious what you think.
I can share what we did in districts around Florida for the most part, and from the high school level, it was interesting because I was a high school teacher, and I definitely did not grade like a traditional teacher. And I feel like for years, we've been hearing teachers say, we just want to assess students on where they are based on mastery of the standards, and our grading system does not allow for that. So now we were put in this situation where we're going to have to give these kids grades because we have high school seniors, high school juniors who are trying to get into college and take that next step. And it was, what is that going to look like? So what most people that I've talked to did in Florida were they took that third quarter grade from January to March, and whatever you got for that grade, you got for the last 9 weeks as well. And they averaged it all together. In some cases, there was an exam. In some cases, there was not. They pretty much went to every measure possible to try to get as many kids to graduate as they could because they didn't want this to hold anyone back. But there were some kids that just fell off the grid or were completely unreachable or were completely apathetic to the situation because maybe there were other things that were going on. When we respond to trauma, everyone responds differently. So it's hard because for me as a mom with my elementary kids, I'm like, throw out the grade book, who cares? But I get that there are high school seniors and juniors and scholarship deadlines. And so much of their future is going to be impacted by what we do right now in our school systems and the grade that we justify giving them. So I do not envy high school principals or anyone at the district level in assessment and accountability who had to come up with a plan of what that looked like, because you are literally impacting children's lives for the next 10 years, if not more.
It's so interesting that you say that. I had a very eye-opening conversation with my 13-year-old stepdaughter who found out that for her third quarter marking period, she was going to receive a pass-fail. And she wanted to know if that meant that she wouldn't be on the principal's list, because her goal is to make it on the principal's list every single quarter. And we had a really deep conversation about, is the purpose the learning, or is the purpose the principal's list? And I think that what this experience has done is sort of brought that conversation to the surface. We missed the New York State assessments. I think we're okay,
But that goes to my point, Sari, is that we have for far too long built instruction and curriculum around extrinsic values and reaching for things like assessments and scholarships and principals lists and dean's lists, and I think perhaps the pendulum has swung a bit too far, and now that we have experienced this collectively, hopefully there's a collective reexamination of what we do and why we do it and how we do it, and with that hopefully comes some really important changes for the fall.
Yeah, I could talk about what we did in Illinois. It's not that different than what we just heard Michelle talk about in Florida. But I think, this idea of, during that fourth quarter, students' grades really couldn't go down. They could go up, but they couldn't go down. We took a snapshot of that grade, and I think that presented a real challenge for teachers who were really used to using grades to motivate kids. And they had to think of other ways to motivate kids. So it definitely brings that conversation to the forefront about how do you motivate students to engage in learning and for that intrinsic motivation, just for the fact of learning for the sake of learning. We did have some teachers, though. In our district, we started transitioning to standards-based grading. So we actually have some staff members operating in a traditional grade book and some staff members operating in a standards-based grade book. And we actually have some teachers who have reached out to us to say, I want to get in that standards-based grading cohort, because they actually saw that through their experience with e-learning, that if they had been in standards-based grading, it would have been easier. And the standards-based grading teachers were like, and I think they might have heard that from their colleagues, because the standards-based grading teachers were like, it's easy for me. It's no problem for me. So that was a nice little thing to have come out of it.
I love that idea. So we only have a few minutes remaining. So let me, if you think I started with a difficult question, wait till I ask this one. So now what? Now what? We've experienced COVID. We've experienced a reaction to it. We've experienced remote learning and everything, all the good, the bad, and the ugly that has accompanied that. But the future is still very much uncertain. So how do we as educators and educational leaders plan for 10 weeks from now when this all starts all over again? So I hand that off to the experts on the panel, because I certainly don't know the answer.
I think I'm going to pull out some of the themes just from this conversation. And I think there are things that we know we have to address no matter what, whether we're going back to brick and mortar or blended learning or whatever. So we know there are equity issues. And I think hopefully districts have a clearer picture of what those issues are and possibly some ideas of how to solve them, or people who are willing to come to the table to solve them. I think that we know that no matter what, we have to be able to have flexible lessons. So I think Allison mentioned it earlier, where it's okay, this is what it looks like in the classroom, and this is what it might look like in a virtual setting. I think we know that teachers are going to almost have like a plan A and plan B. what if my school has a COVID outbreak? And, that's what I'm envisioning is maybe entire districts don't shut down. We just shut down schools and switch to virtual, because we have schools that are very rural and they're going to be very upset if they have to close because someone in the inner city, had a breakout. So what would it look like as a district if we only shut down certain schools, or if we can contain it even faster than that? Are there just classrooms that we have to, shut down and maybe go virtual for 2 weeks or 3 weeks until everyone is safe to come back? What does that look like? I think that the recurring theme is just flexibility and responsiveness, and making sure that we are keeping those key issues that came up on the table, and we're not going to let them go until we have some sort of plausible solution for it.
And I'll agree with that too, because there are definitely things that are not in our control. Like, we don't know what school is going to look like in the fall yet, and we're getting really good as administrators of saying, like Sari was saying, like, I don't know, in a way that feels very comforting. But there are some things that we do know, like you're mentioning. We do know that we have equity issues. We do know that we have families who don't have access or don't have the support. So what plans can we put in place now to address those equity issues, whether we're in-person instruction or remote instruction? Like, for our district, we do know we need to choose a platform like Google Classroom, where we're going to all use it so that we can get better at using it together. And we could focus on getting familiar with Google Classroom right now. But the one thing that I do want to mention too, I think one of the most immediate things to do is for teachers to take a break. Like, we need a break this summer. And it's not like we were maybe working our tails off in the same way we were in a classroom when we're at home, but we were worrying our tails off. And I want teachers, educators across the country, across the world, if you're able to take a couple weeks break from worrying about what school is going to look like in the fall. Let's do that first, and then let's focus on step by step. What do we know for sure right now, and what can we do about that? And then move forward with what do we know now, and what can we do about that, and so on, until we have this solid, beautiful plan that we work together to take us into the fall.
I love that. Does that break come with alcohol, Alice?
Mine does.
Okay.
I think I'll piggyback off on that last phrase that Allison just said, working together. One of the things that we did in the spring when all this, kind of just imploded on us was, it was largely like our administrative team locked in a room for like 3 days straight, nonstop on Zoom, trying to figure out how to redesign school. But now we don't have to do it that way. We can bring in so many more voices. So, we've created teams and working groups along, focused on the different problems we know we need to solve for the fall. And on each of those teams, we have administrators, we have teachers, we have department chairs. So we have a lot more voices that we can bring in to really thinking and planning that we couldn't do when we were just like in fire drill mode in March.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all the points that I'm hearing right now. Jill, Allison, to kick off the break. Everybody definitely needs the break. As educators, we are hardwired to care and to worry. And for us, I think one of the most important things that we're trying to wrap up the year with is ensuring that we're giving the families the support that they need to transition into the summer, and to share with the staff so they are also able to let go a little bit, because Allison referred to that emotional space that we have been living in, and we have definitely been really worrying. And I've had several conversations with educators. How do I let go? This is not like every other school year. How do I just not Zoom next week? How do I just disconnect? Right? I mean, that's really not easy. And then to Jill's point, you're talking about the planning and bringing in all those different stakeholders. And I think that that's really what we do best. We reflect, we look back on what we've done for the last few months, really, think about what's been working, and hear all those other voices, and develop what Michelle was referring to, flexibility. We really need that flexible plan, because who knows on the drop of the dime, like what tomorrow is going to bring. But now we do have this little bit of a gift of time to be able to plan appropriately for a successful, year, to, match the needs of all of our students, and hopefully flatten the equity issues that we have been seeing bubbling to the surface.
I think I agree with all four of you. I think that I'll just say lastly that I think that at this point, we can't make excuses anymore for next year. I mean, like you said, I love the phrase you used. It was a fire drill, right, in March. But now we've been through a couple of fire drills and we know what needs to be done. So there are no excuses for leaving anyone out of the conversation about what needs to be done for our kids in September. Um, you're right. There is a big unknown, but guess what? We know what that unknown kind of looks like now. So we can make appropriate plans to make sure that the one thing that we have to do is make sure that our schools are the constant for our kids, because the world is not a constant right now for them. It's, the world is gone, upside down, topsy turvy. Many families have been disrupted. The one thing that we need to focus on is making sure that our kids know that the school is there. It's the constant. It's what they can rely on every single day that they're with us.
Nick, I don't know about you, but this is a dream come true podcast for me, because this is just the level of expertise that we're lucky enough to be engaging with here is just off the charts, and I just personally can't thank each of you enough for taking the time out of your very, very busy lives and spending an hour with us and sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us and with our listeners. And I'm just blown away. And I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for words, which doesn't happen that often, as Nick can attest.
Well, I'll just say thank you for reinforcing my belief that there are wonderful educators all over America who are inspiring people to do great things. And if all of our students are in the hands of administrators of your caliber, and Mark, I'll throw you in their group as well. We will be more than well prepared for whatever challenge we have. So thank you. You're a wonderful group.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here. Thank
It
you.
was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts or on the web, stateofedpodcast.com, where you'll also find links to what we've discussed today and also a little bit more about our guests. You can follow us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. Pick up a copy of my book, Forward Fast, Making Sense of Education in an Era of Rapid Change, wherever books are sold, which basically means Amazon nowadays. Or Twitter at Marc Isix, or on the web, marcisix.com. Once again, a big thanks to Jill, Sari, Allison, Michelle, and Nicole for an incredible conversation. And to all of our listeners, please stay safe. These are really difficult times, but if we work together, we're going to get through it, and we'll be even better on the other side. Have a good one.